Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Oscar Buzz. Today we are talking about Kinds of Kindness, the latest Yorgos Lanthimos film. I'm Trevor. I'm joined by Thomas. And this is an interesting one. This is coming like 6 months, 7 months off the back of Poor Things, a film that we both liked, didn't love. I've definitely lessened on it the more that I've sat with it. But we got Emma Stone coming back. We got Jesse Plemons. We got Willem Dafoe, Margaret Qualley,
Are you
Hong
gonna
Chow.
name everyone in the cast?
No, I was just gonna name those 5.
Yeah, good, fair
Very
enough.
fun cast though. Mamadou Athie, sorry, another one.
Yeah.
But it's a very, very fun cast. Was more into some of the performances than the others. But yeah, I have very mixed feelings about this one.
Same, and mine are mostly mixed negative for the most part. I'll start by prefacing, obviously, that Yorgos Lanthimos tier list video is on the channel now. I was not involved in that.
Because you don't like it.
Really, because I don't like Euros, exactly. I think Poor Things is probably my favourite, the most positive I've been on one of his films, and that is saying something, because I don't love the film. I think it's a fairly strong film, but nothing more than that. Anyway, this one, I was not a fan of, unfortunately. I think a lot of times the problems with anthology films is that they feel disjointed. That is the most common criticism they're throwing at them. I don't necessarily think that's entirely true in this case. I don't think that's the film's major weakness. For me, the major weakness is the fact that for the first third, I'm really invested. I'm really liking what's going on. For the second third, I'm sort of respecting it, but going, this isn't for me, really. And for the final third, I'm completely unengaged. I'm completely just not invested.
Yeah.
The problem is, this is an anthology film with hits and misses. And the problem is, the misses are more common as you go further and further along. The third part for me is easily the weakest part. And it makes the entire thing just feel like a bit of a tedious journey to sit through. And so I was bored by the end. I was tired by the end. And I really just wanted it to be over. It's a long film. It's 2 hours 40. I don't think you could trim much of it. It's fairly, all in one
Each
piece.
story is fairly concise and to the point.
Exactly. But the problem is when you've got the first story that I think is strong and you just sort of lose interest throughout, it creates this overall negative feeling coming out of the film. It's the type of one where I might think more positively of it with time, but right now, coming out of the cinema a couple hours ago, really, yeah, I'm quite sour on it overall.
Yeah, I don't know. I came out of the theater very confused about my thoughts because I would agree. I think the stories go 1, 2, 3, which does make it just feel a bit exhausting towards the end. And also the fact that tonally they're really quite the same.
Yeah, they are.
And also they're all exploring these themes of like the kinds of kindness, right? Which is just like how we perceive and desire for a human connection and how much we want to fit into social circles and be socially accepted by people that we deem as more important than us. And they're all playing with that idea, but they're all kind of exploring those themes in the exact same way. Like it reminded me of, there's this quote, I think it's from Noah Baumbach, where he talks about like every filmmaker is just making the same film, but like over and over again, but with different like dressing or something like that. That was the exact quote, but that was essentially what he's saying. Like, you're making the same film, exploring the same ideas and everything like that, but just presenting it with different clothes. And it felt in a very direct way. Like that is exactly what Yorgos was doing here. Just kind of doing the same thing and exploring the same ideas, but with slightly different dressing each time. The problem is that because each story only has like 45, 50 minutes to its name, there's absolutely no nuance to each of the stories. They are all very, very blunt and kind of to the point with how they're expressing their ideas. And since the ideas are also similar, it just feels like you're kind of being beaten over the head by the same idea with each individual segment.
No, there is an argument to be made that maybe it's not that the first story is so strong and the third story
it's just
so
the
weak,
idea is fresher.
because it's the idea, exactly. There is definitely, I could see that case made, although still I do think there is something that the third story is just not it. The third story is this third story the longest? I don't know. Someone would have to
I'm not sure. It felt like
it
the
felt the longest. It definitely felt the longest.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. Like the trailer would not suggest that these three would all be so tonally cohesive. Like, I think they play every black and white shot in the film in the trailer just to show that, like, oh, maybe it's, experiment different styles, whatever. It is really the same film 3 times, and that's not just.
And they all take. And the thing is that they're all linked by the character RMF.
Yeah.
And because they're ordered, I think 2, 1, 3 chronologically. Because you start out with, we'll get into spoiler. We start out with RMF being the helicopter person who takes Emma Stone back from the island with the dogs. And then we have RMF then being the guy who's supposed to be in the car accident, who is run over by Jesse Plemons, and then him being dead is who they're trying to like resurrect in the third story. So they're all even taking place within sequence. I don't understand why they're out of order chronologically. I don't understand what the point of that
I
is.
think, and that just felt like a choice because let's just make a choice here. I think that the problem is that they're all very closely aesthetically and tonally. I honestly think it needed a better framing device than the RMF stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't a fan of a French Dispatch, but that had a clear framing device and a clear reason to exist. And each sort of segment, it gave you time to pause. It gave you time to reflect on the sequence that came before. And it was to the point where each should have recontextualized the previous one. This, I don't think, does any of that stuff. It never gives you that time to pause, that time to reflect on what you just watched, and it just launches you straight back into it. And the problem is that the tone is just, it's too cohesive, it's too consistent, and it's a tone that I'm not a massive fan of anyway, as someone who doesn't really like this offbeat, deadpan style of delivery that Yorgos likes and is clearly successful for a lot of people. Like, I'm not saying the tone is
and I think that's why I like it slightly more than you, is that I just simply am more amicable to that style of filmmaking.
Exactly.
I like Yorgos's deadpan, dry sense of humor.
Whereas I'm already coming into it with the weight of knowing that this is not going to be something that really gels with me personally. And it never did anything to really bring me on. It never did anything to sort of allow me to get invested towards the end. It just sort of, it didn't have that framing device I think it was so needing, really.
And The French Dispatch is a film that I actually like a lot. Like, that's like a strong 8 out of 10 for me. I enjoy that film quite a bit.
It's
I think
interesting because I've got
stronger films.
Sure. I've got very similar feelings, but very different reasons why I've arrived at those fairly negative feelings for the most part. The French Dispatch, I did think was just, like all aesthetic. And I think that is all style and no substance. And I don't think it really understood what it wanted to do. And I also thought that one was very long and kept the same problem with this one, where some segments I was so much more invested in than others. Anthology films just really aren't for me. I think they were a lot better as TV series. If you're doing an anthology TV series, that makes sense.
I agree with that overall.
An anthology film.
I know. The French Dispatch just really works for me for some reason.
Yeah, I think it's got to do something because each segment, as I said, has got to recontextualize the other one another in a new way. You've got to be constantly thinking about the first segment as you're watching the third segment, I think, in an anthology film, if it's going to work. This one, I don't get any of that. You're immediately
It really just felt like Yorgos had 3 different ideas and was like, why not just throw it in? And the RMF stuff all felt very tacked on.
Yeah. It felt like he had 3 ideas that he knew couldn't be features.
Yeah.
And he wasn't that interested in exploring it and building out features. You mentioned before that you would be happily see the first one just be made for a featured one. And I don't entirely agree.
Like a 90-minute feature, not like a...
Yeah, no, for sure. But like still, I don't entirely agree because I think that they are all distilled in this way. And I do appreciate the fact that he distills everything. I appreciate the bluntness to an extent. But the problem is when the bluntness is then followed by more bluntness and then followed by more, which is all really insane.
And that's kind of
the problem comes.
Like, it feels like you're just getting like beaten the head over and over again with the thesis. And then by the time you've gotten beaten over the head by the thesis for, 2 hours, 40 minutes, then you're just like, you have a concussion and you're too dizzy. And then you can't even read what the thesis is supposed to be because it's so incredibly heavy handed. And there's so much of the film that just feels like it's being quirky and absurd for the sake of being quirky and being absurd.
For the sake of the Lanthimos brand. I feel like Lanthimos,
I particularly felt that in the second story, which I had a lot of fun. Like, I had a very good time watching this movie. Like, even if I did feel like it dragged a bit, like, I went and saw it with a couple of friends, like, friends also a very big Yorgos fan. Like, we had a good time watching it. I found it quite funny. Even if a lot of the humor is very built out of just like straight deliberate provocation more than anything else. Like, the style of humor works for me. I enjoyed it, but like, particularly with that second story, it just feels so overt and just so pointlessly absurd for absolutely no reason. And it feels like the overindulgence in absurdity even kind of like takes away from the thesis in a way.
Yeah, because it's interesting because the second one was the one that I was watching and thinking, if you were a Yorgos fan, I can see you liking this one. Personally, as someone who's not really, this is one that's just not for me. But it's one of those
ones. The third one
is
just kind of a mess.
The third one I think is a mess, and I think is pretty easily the weakest one. The second one, if you liked it, I can understand exactly why, if you're down for this style. But to be honest, I think Lanthimos has sort of just picked a lane and is sticking with it. And it's not a lane that I really enjoy. And I think that is really where the main disconnect is coming from. Like, I feel like Lanthimos at times he understands his brand too well. And he knows exactly what he needs to do to appeal to Yorgos fans. So I can see why, if you are a fan of his, this is really taking to you, and this is basically just getting 3 more films from him in one.
Yeah.
Like, I can understand the appeal there. But yeah, it's not
And
really
it's interesting because I do like Yorgos quite a bit, but I just I don't know, it didn't work for me. And I've seen a lot of people also compare this to Dogtooth, interestingly, and say that it's like it's very similar to Dogtooth, which it does have the same writer as that.
Yeah.
And like my favorite Yorgos films, as you go watch the tier list video that we did, but Dogtooth, Sacred Deer, and Lobster are like top tier Yorgos for me. Like that's where I think he's at his strongest. I think that the McNamara stuff is kind of weaker as far as his English language films, which is where we differ. You prefer the McNamara stuff.
Yeah, and this was something I really sort of realized coming out of this is that where he works best is when it's not stuff that is written by him, because he's always contributing with Filippo when they're doing their stuff. And honestly, like, it was interesting. I was actually watching it thinking, I can picture The Lobster slotting in quite nicely here. I think The Lobster, a lot of the problems I have with The Lobster would be fixed if you condensed it down to a 40-minute thing and kept the concept. I think the concept of The Lobster is really, really strong. I really like the concept, but it doesn't do what it needs to do with it. I think if you condense it down, and the same with Dogtooth, I think there is a lot to like in the concept and in the premise of Dogtooth. It's just overexpanded and it just creates an unfocused.
And I think that those are his most focused and thematically interesting and singular projects as far as vision and execution.
Whereas, and it's his vision that I'm not really connecting with. So maybe that I would probably agree with. I do think they are his most sort of soul visionary things.
Yeah.
But that's not kind of what I want. I want McNamara there overseeing it and creating a screenplay that can get me invested in character first and foremost.
Also makes sense with how we collaborate as we've worked on writing stuff. Like I'm very much just go for the weird shit and then you kind of tone it down and make it more approachable.
Yeah.
And
because I do think you need a vessel to watch. Like, you need something there that is connecting you.
You're my Tony McNamara.
And I think in Poor Things, you have that. Yeah, there you go. And I'll take that. I think he's a very competent screenwriter. But yes, like, I think in Poor Things there, you have that with the characters. I think even in The Favourite, which isn't my, like, I don't love The Favourite. A lot of that is due to the direction, though, more so than the screenplay aspects. But yeah, the point still stands that I think Dogtooth and Lobster would fit quite nicely into this sort of thing. I don't think it's too much of a departure from that kind of thing. And it's just his collaboration with Filippo that I'm not a big fan of. And it's those two together, the way they bounce off each other. It's very successful in terms of creating films that people really like, but they're not ones for me.
Yeah, and just kind of to finish my point earlier, like, I don't see the Dogtooth comparisons at all because I do feel like this just is a bit shattered, I guess, as far as what it's trying to say with its themes. Whereas I do think for me, I feel like Dogtooth is, again, very singular in its vision with that. And if I were to compare this to another Yorgos project, and you mentioned it, like, it would be The Lobster. I feel like The Lobster is the most similar as a whole to this one. And I really don't understand the Dogtooth comparisons, to be honest.
No, fair enough. But I do understand the side though, because I could see this being condensed down version and just slotted into this kind of thing. I think it's got that same vibe, and I think it's because of the unified tone that he is. Like, he's someone with a voice, and you've got to respect a director that has a clear voice and a clear vision for all this stuff. And I don't think that is lacking here. I just think the voice and the vision was not used for the best product, really, in this case.
For sure. But I think that's all we really have to say about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, is it worth mentioning the performances? Because I know we had a slight disagreement about Jesse Plemons.
I think Jesse Plemons is very, very good at this. And I think that he is very good at being a chameleon while also standing out every time. Like, I feel like you could genuinely throw him any role in any sort of production and he would just slot right in and he wouldn't stick out and he would also somehow be the standout of the film as well. Like,
I can see the chameleon aspect. I don't think he's showcasing that here, though. And I do think there is an extent to his performance where I'm like, yes, okay, I've seen you do this stuff before. I made this comparison, but I wasn't surprised by anything he was doing. Whereas Willem Dafoe, even though I've seen him do stuff like this, stuff in the same vein, I think his ability to constantly surprise me with the choices he made, constantly surprise me with what he's going for, is the sign of a generation. Like, I think Willem Dafoe for me was the standout in the film personally.
Sure. I also quite like Margaret Qualley.
Yes.
Mamadou Athie, I thought was quite good as well. Particularly in that second story, I think that he works quite well.
Hong Chow, I think, was sadly underutilized. Really.
Yeah, she was definitely underused. I mean, Joe Alwyn wasn't. Hunter Schafer just showed up for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, she was barely in it. And then Emma Stone, we mentioned as well.
I was a bit disappointed.
Yeah.
Also, we were saying we did talk about this movie before, and
Oh,
you
yeah.
you aren't, like,
Sorry.
having a mental break
Mixing up.
and
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
remembering something
Yeah.
from earlier in this review. But, yeah, no, we talked kind of beforehand about how Emma Stone was kind of disappointing, in this, at least for me, and it might just be, like, coming off of a work
Maybe.
as I
Go
mean,
back
maybe
to
her magnum opus in Poor Things.
La La
Like,
Land, but sure.
I think I enjoyed the La La Land
I
performance
promise
more,
it's probably more impressive in
I
that
think
film.
the Poor Thing performance is more impressive, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, it felt like she didn't really and I don't think it's even entirely on her, I just feel like she didn't ever really get, like, a moment to do much.
No, I don't think her presence is really that strong and that widely felt, which is
And her
weird since she's
and her
Emma Stone.
most her the story that she's in the most by far is that 3rd story, which is just
Yeah.
kind of the most messy and convoluted.
Yeah. No. But
So, but yeah.
yeah, those probably
It's an interesting film, and, like,
yeah.
again, I had a lot of fun with this one, I enjoyed it a lot. I don't think I would even hate rewatching it, but I think it's, for me, the worst of his English language films.
Yeah, whereas I think this is just on the level of a lot of his other films. I just think I didn't find much in it personally that really resonated, and I think there were fundamental problems with it, really, in terms of the anthology structuring and the way that that perpetuates just feeling tired by the end of it.
Yeah.
I think there are really basic problems with this film that are very difficult to fix. Like, I don't know, I'd rather see Lanthimos in like a collaborative project doing one episode in an anthology film. I
Yeah.
think that is
Yeah,
where
yeah.
he'd be slightly more natural than all three so
It just felt like a
intrinsically
bit of
with
a
his
scrapyard of
personality.
ideas that weren't gonna
Yeah,
get turned into anything else.
yeah. So I'd be looking at probably a 4, really.
Yeah. I'm at, like, a pretty solid 6
Yeah.
for me, and I think that difference really just comes down to, I enjoy the tone, even if I
Yeah.
think it is a bit overwrought, whereas you don't.
And because those 4 points are really just coming from, because as I say, I genuinely like the first story. I
Yeah.
think, and maybe as you say, that is due to the fact that you get tired of the tone. But either way, I think the first story is well told. I think it's concise. I think it's got the right pacing. I think it knows what it wants to be and does that pretty well. So
Yeah.
it is a shame that the rest of the film couldn't live up to that for me.
For sure, for sure. But yes, that is it. Those are our thoughts on Kinds of Kindness, a 6 and a 4. Put them together, you got a 10 between
A
us.
10. Sure. It's one way of looking at it. Or 10 out of 20. So halfway
Well,
there.
you know. But yes, plenty more reviews coming up. We got the Bike Riders. We got Fancy Dance. We got Maybe Horizon. We got Oscar predictions coming up soon, everybody.
Exciting.
Oscar predictions are back.
Mid-season Oscar
Everyone your
predictions.
tier list. Lots of fun stuff. But that is it for now. So until next time, thank you everybody for watching. Stay safe and goodbye.